listener production.
Hi, Helen Smith here with you, and welcome to The Briefing. Australia's second biggest private hospital operator, Healthscope, has been overrun with patient scandals since 2020. While it's up for sale after collapsing earlier this year, its hospitals continue to operate, and important questions remain over the viability and safety of for-profit healthcare.
When you go to these emergency departments run by a private operator, a lot of people would think that they are actually better than the public hospital. They are not.
We look into what happens when profits and patient care collides in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Tuesday, the 19th of August.
Hey Helen, and to you listening, a major investigation is underway after a newborn infant was found dead in a storm drain in Western Australia. Emergency services were called to a street in Perth's north yesterday afternoon after the baby's body was found by tradespeople who'd been cleaning the drain at the time. Now, officers believe the baby may have only been a few days old and was found wrapped in a sheet.
The area's been cornered off as a crime scene, with detectives now interviewing anyone who came into contact with the scene or the child, and they're attempting to identify the newborn's parents. An emergency alert's also been issued to all maternity hospitals in Perth, with authorities concerned about the mother's welfare. Anyone with information's urged to contact the WA Police.
Australian representatives to the Palestinian Authority have had their visas revoked by Israel's foreign minister after the federal government's decision to recognise Palestinian statehood. It also comes after the Australian government refused to grant visas to high-profile Israelis in recent months. In a post to X, the Israeli Foreign Minister says the Albanese government's cancellation of politician Simcha Rothman's visa ahead of his speaking tour was shameful and unacceptable, saying with anti-Semitism on the rise, the Australian government is fueling the crisis with false accusations.
The Foreign Minister also instructed the Israeli embassy in Canberra to carefully examine any official Australian visa application for entry to Israel. However, our Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke, says the government takes a hard line on people who seek to come to our country and spread division, and that if you are coming to Australia to spread a message of hate and division, we don't want you here. Now, Rothman is a member of the religious Zionism Party, which is part of alleged war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition, and has been scheduled to appear in Sydney and Melbourne as part of a solidarity tour for Jewish Australians. And he's previously described Palestinian children in Gaza as enemies.
Yeah, and the parties also previously denied starvation claims in Gaza and advocated for Palestinian removal from the region. Now, as for the revoked visas of the Australian representatives to the Palestinian Authority, it looks like only 2 Australian staff members may have been affected so far, but Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong has called the move an unjustified reaction, saying the Netanyahu government is isolating Israel and undermining international efforts toward peace and a two-state solution, which Australia will continue to work toward.
Outback Wrangler star Matt Wright's being countersued over the death of his co-star and friend, Chris Willow Wilson. It comes after Willow's wife filed a lawsuit against the aviator regulator, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, Wright, and his company Helibrook in the federal court. The aviation regulators since made a counterclaim, arguing Wright should pay all damages related to the 2022 fatal helicopter crash to Willow's wife, and that he's ultimately responsible.
Yeah, CASA claims that Wright's failure to comply with the regulator's conditions either caused or significantly contributed to Willow's death. And in Ms. Wilson's claim, she says the regulator should never have allowed the method that was being used for collecting crocodile eggs that day, which saw Willow slung below a helicopter and lowered down when collecting. Meanwhile, she says Matt Wright failed by not ensuring a culture of safety, appropriate systems, practices and procedures were in place, backed by CASA's cross-claim, which states Wright was required to ensure his workers and helicopter complies with its safety terms.
And the trial's set to return to the Northern Territory Supreme Court on Friday, where Matt Wright's facing 3 counts of attempting to pervert the course of justice. He's previously denied all the allegations against him, including negligence by himself or his company.
The AFL has launched an investigation into an alleged homophobic incident involving some of this season's top-ranked teams. Adelaide Crows player Isaac Rankin is under investigation over an alleged homophobic slur towards a Collingwood opponent and faces being banned for the AFL finals. Now, the AFL has confirmed it is aware of the allegations and the integrity unit's making inquiries. Meanwhile, Adelaide Crows captain Jordan Dawson says it'll be a call for the league to make.
It's obviously in the AFL's hands and we'll let them investigate it and see what happens.
Does another incident like this speak to a cultural issue within the AFL?
No, I don't think so.
However, Collingwood Vice-Captain Braden Maynard says homophobic incidents happen too often in the AFL and need to be stamped out of the game. It's the fourth such alleged incident at the AFL level in the past 2 seasons and 6th involving AFL-listed players who have been given game bans and suspensions for making homophobic comments to opponents. And it comes after former AFLW star Mona Hope called out vile, disgusting and relentless verbal abuse she received from both opposition players and the crowd over the weekend at a qualifying finals clash, with the local league being notified of the comments.
But what they were saying was disgusting. Absolutely disgusting.
I just don't understand why people do this. Can't you just go to a game and watch your favourite team without kind of stooping to this level, Helen? Like, I don't get why people have to be a grub. It's awful and it's harmful, and I think it just ruins the fun of the sport for me.
Yeah, it certainly does. And look, we see homophobic comments and also racism across all codes of sport in Australia. And I think it's really important for clubs and leagues and boards of these big organisations to take a stand and make it clear that this behaviour is not acceptable.
And in the latest ep of news that would have Shakespeare rolling in his grave, a fresh slate of Gen Z and Gen Alpha words have been added to the Cambridge Dictionary. First, the term made infamous by the YouTube channel and video you just heard, skibidi toilet, which went viral for the gibberish word, essentially meaning brain rot content often consumed online. Just like that one. And we actually did a deep dive on this phenomena around skibidi toilet, so we'll chuck a link for that in the show notes. Now, next, we've got a term that's caused a bit of a stir this year.
A topic that has been quite honestly haunting all of my For You pages. The topic of the controversial, conspiratorial tradwives.
Tradwife, short for traditional wife, which according to the Cambridge Dictionary is a married woman, especially one who posts on social media, who stays at home doing cooking, cleaning and has children she takes care of, as well as being a social media influencer who makes money off their content. Or this lady's explanation, which I think hits the 2025 controversy of it a bit better.
Traditional wife or traditional housewife in recent Western culture typically denotes a woman who believes in and practices patriarchal roles and marriages.
Next, who could forget this delightful term dropped by our PM in Parliament after a dare from some influencers?
They are delulu with no salulu, Mr. Speaker. They are completely delusional.
Go, Albo. Delulu, officially now in the books, along with some other words like inspo, short for inspiration, and look, L-E-W-K, which was popularised from RuPaul's Drag Race and references a fashion look. And finally, forever chemicals, because who doesn't love that 90% of us, Helen, have some harmful man-made forever chemicals in our body impacting humans and the planet, right?
Yeah, look, I love finding out that our water or even the dirt at the park might have some forever chemicals in it. So, yeah, I love that one for us. But that brings our headlines to a close for today. Coming up is my deep dive into HealthScope and our private hospital system, looking into why there's been major investigations into the health sector with millions of dollars on the line. That's coming up next. There are over 630 private hospitals across Australia that hundreds of thousands of us visit every year, with many of us assuming we'll get better care than in the public system. But what if the opposite of that is true? That's the question being asked after a spate of fatal and serious incidents at hospitals run by one of our largest private providers, Healthscope, including the death of a toddler that's resulted in a law banning future public-private partnerships in acute hospitals in New South Wales. Christine Ahern is a Channel 9 reporter who's conducted a massive investigation into Healthscope and our private hospital sector. Christine, how much power does Healthscope hold in our Australian hospital system?
Well, Healthscope run 37 hospitals in Australia, 37 private hospitals. So they're our second largest private provider for hospitals in Australia. So, they are a significant power when it comes to private hospitals in Australia.
And why are we seeing private hospitals at the moment struggling with financial stability?
Well, Healthscope's problems really emerged in COVID, particularly here in Victoria, because we had such a long lockdown. So people just weren't going to hospitals for elective surgeries because they couldn't, and that's where all their financial problems began.
Because we know most private hospitals, they are those day surgeries, those elective surgeries. So I guess that trickle effect is still ongoing to right now.
Yeah, and Healthscope, what we focused on with our two investigations for 60 Minutes was the privately run emergency departments. So in Victoria, we actually have quite a few privately run emergency departments. I can't give you a figure because we couldn't find out how many. There wasn't a database to tell us just how many privately run emergency departments there were, but I tried to manually compare them with New South Wales and Queensland, literally counting them up myself. And Victoria seems to have the most. Now, why that's an issue is because private hospitals are two kind of separate things. You can go to a private hospital for your elective surgery, your knee surgery, and things like that. That it's not urgent. Where it becomes a real problem, and this is what we've seen with Healthscope-run private emergency departments, is when you go to these emergency departments run by a private operator, a lot of people would think that they are actually better than the public hospital. They are not. A public hospital in Melbourne, the Alfred or the Royal Melbourne or the Austin, you've got 24-hour lab results. You've got 24-hour, all these doctors that are working 24 hours, specialists on hands. You don't have that in a privately run emergency department. So in some of these instances, people have been going for vital blood tests. They don't have a lab on site. They've been sent via a courier off-site to a lab, to the wrong lab, had to go to the right lab. By the time it's come back, it's too late in some of these cases. That's the problem we've been uncovering with Healthscope, is the emergency departments, the critical care they run.
And in your investigation into Healthscope, you spoke with victims' family members. What did they want to see change the most?
A lot of them wanted privately run emergency departments to disappear. They did not think Healthscope should be running emergency departments. Yes, for elective surgeries, but no, not for that critical care where people are coming into those emergency departments often critically ill and they need top-level care. In publicly run emergency departments in Australia, you have far more checks and balances. You have far more facilities at the ready to go and help patients than you do in these privately run emergency departments. So these families that we were speaking to didn't want Healthscope to be running emergency departments in Australia anymore.
And why is there such a big disparity between the public health emergency areas that you might go to and visit, the hospitals, and the private health hospitals' emergencies?
Governance. Basically, Healthscope are the ones that decide how many, say, nurses should be in triage, whereas in the public system, they need to run it via the government guidelines. In Healthscope, it's for profit. So you can see where you can run into trouble because they might decide that there is only one nurse that needs to be on triage. It's Healthscope's decision how they run their hospital. And of course, Healthscope is a for-profit organisation. So it's the governance. You don't have, and a lot of these families were saying, you don't have proper governance when it comes to a privately run emergency department, as you do with the publicly run emergency department, because they have government guidelines they must follow.
And what was the response from Healthscope to your investigation?
Well, we desperately wanted to interview the new chief executive, the new CEO, Tino Lespina, because not only did we want to speak to them as part of our investigation, I had 3 grieving families that wanted answers from Healthscope. They're the Moylan family. They're the first investigation I did when their pregnant daughter, Annie Moylan, died at a Healthscope hospital, a privately run emergency department, Holmesglen. We had the Sindos family, whose son James also passed away after being misdiagnosed at Holmesglen, run by Healthscope, an emergency department there. And the Massa family, of course, well known, with little Joe dying at the Northern Beaches Hospital, again, an emergency department run by Healthscope. It is extraordinary for me to fathom that these parents were the ones that actually had to uncover the truth of what happened to their loved ones in these Healthscope hospitals, because Healthscope was not forthcoming with the information, to the point that in the case of the Sindos family and the Massa family, they had both asked for critical CCTV to be kept, which would establish a timeline when patients would go in. And in both those incidents, the hospital did not keep that critical CCTV. Why? We'd love to ask them. But they declined our request for an interview. We ended up tracking down a place where we knew Tino Lespina would be leaving to head for work one day, and we tried to get answers out of him then. He did not speak.
Our healthcare system is under enormous pressure at the moment, whether that's with funding or staffing issues. But why are private hospitals coming under the microscope right now? Because
you have got the health of Australians in the hands of a privately run company. And I know in speaking to the Massa family, they wanted that stopped when it came to critical care. Because if you dig down into Healthscope, Healthscope is actually run by Brookfield, a Canadian asset manager. So you've got this Canadian company in charge of Australian healthcare. And particularly with the Massa family, they wanted that to stop. But that is why it is under the microscope. When you boil it down, you've got Australians' healthcare, critical care, in the hands of these privately run hospitals, and they are for profit. So the question always is, are they putting profits ahead of patients?
You mentioned there Joe, who passed away at a public-private hospital, and earlier this year we saw the New South Wales government introduce Joe's Law, named after the 2-year-old. Advocates have praised this decision. Is this a positive step forward to ban these public-private partnerships when it comes to our hospitals?
I believe it is. So this was a unique model to have this public-private partnership. So for those that don't know how the Northern Beaches Hospital was run, and of course Healthscope is now in the process of handing this back, but it was in a sense a public hospital. So you could go into the emergency department and get your, say for instance with a broken hand and get that fixed up and walk out, and you don't pay anything because it's under the public system. However, it was being run by a private company, Healthscope. So it's a really unique model, and in theory that sounds okay. But again, we run into that problem of governance. So Healthscope were the ones that were running the hospital. And so Healthscope were the ones, this private company were the ones that were making all the decisions. Now, I'm not questioning the doctors and the nurses, but if they are working in a hospital environment that is not properly resourced, does not have the right amount of nurses on, right amount of doctors on, doesn't have the main specialists on, can't get certain lab tests at certain times, can't get scans because this specialist is not on, they have to wait till Monday, that is where the wheels start to fall off this partnership. So I believe it is a very pertinent step that the New South Wales government have done in making sure that these public-private partnerships don't happen again.
So what is the future for private hospitals in Australia?
I think private hospitals definitely have a role to play. As I mentioned, Healthscope run 37 private hospitals around Australia. And a lot of the times you talk to patients and they get very good care in private hospitals. However, when it comes to critical care and what I've uncovered with just these 3 families, and can I tell you there are more, when it's critical care, when it's the emergency departments, when you're going into an emergency department because in one of these instances, the Sindos family, James, was suffering anaphylaxis. He just needed an adrenaline shot and he would be alive today. But he didn't get it and he died. Annie Moylan, she was suffering from sepsis. She went into the emergency department run by HealthScope. She just needed an antibiotic and she would be alive. She didn't get it in time and she died. And we know that Joe Massa, he went into an emergency department again ran by HealthScope. He waited 3 hours for care. If he had been treated earlier, chances are too he would be alive. So yes, private hospitals definitely have a role to play in Australia. But when it comes to that critical care, those emergency departments, that is where the argument is that private hospitals have no place or a very limited place in the healthcare of Australians.
Christine, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks, Helen.
That was Christine Ahern from Channel 9 there. And thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. But before you go though, if you could rate and review The Briefing wherever you're listening from, that's a really easy way you can support everything we do here on the show. And you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.